A while back, Dale Carnegie went to a dinner party in New York and got seated next to a botanist. He'd never really talked to a botanist before, and he found the man electrifying. Sat on the edge of his chair while the expert talked about exotic plants and indoor gardens and the strange secret life of the ordinary potato. There were a dozen other guests at that table. Carnegie ignored every one of them and listened to the botanist for hours. When midnight came and he stood to leave, the botanist turned to their host and praised Carnegie warmly. He was so stimulating, so interesting. He was, the botanist said, one of the most interesting conversationalists he had ever met. Carnegie was a little stunned, because he'd barely said a word all night. He couldn't have talked about botany if he'd wanted to. He knew nothing about it. He had done exactly one thing. He'd listened with his whole attention because he was genuinely fascinated. And the other man felt that and floated home on it. That's the secret hiding inside the last 3 ways to make people like you, and it's almost the opposite of what you'd guess. The way to become the most interesting person in the room is nearly always to stop trying to be interesting at all. The first move is the one we're worst at. Just listen. Most of us don't really listen, we wait. We reload, scanning the other person's sentence for the gap where we can jump back in with our own story. People feel that instantly. Real rapt attention is one of the rarest and most flattering things a human being can give another. As one writer put it, almost nobody is proof against the implied flattery of someone truly hanging on their words. Carnegie once sat beside a woman at a party who had just come back from Africa. He asked her about it, and that was essentially the last thing he said. She talked happily for 45 minutes and never asked about a single one of his own travels, because she didn't want to hear them. She wanted a listener. Most people do. Here's how far that goes. Years ago, the New York telephone company had a customer from hell. A man who screamed at their representatives, refused to pay his bill, wrote furious letters to the papers, and filed lawsuits. So the company sent one of its best troubleshooters to see him. And the troubleshooter did something radical. Nothing. He sat and he listened. The man raved. The troubleshooter said yes, and I see, and let him pour the whole thing out. Then came back and listened again. 4 visits, hours of it. By the end, the furious customer had calmed all the way down, paid what he owed, and dropped his complaints. He'd even started a little protest society, of which the patient troubleshooter became the only other member. Nothing was argued. Nothing was won. The man had simply, finally, been heard, and it turned out that was the thing he'd been fighting for all along. The second move. Talk about what they care about, not what you came to say. Theodore Roosevelt could talk to anyone, cowboy, diplomat, politician, scientist, and the trick wasn't raw genius. Whenever he knew a guest was coming, he'd stay up the night before reading about whatever that person loved most. He understood that the surest road into someone's heart is a conversation about the thing they treasure. A Boy Scout leader named Edward Chalif once needed a wealthy executive to fund a boy's trip to Europe. Before the meeting, he'd heard that this man had once written a check for $1 million and then had it framed. So the first thing Chalif did, walking into that office, was ask if he could please see the famous check. A check for $1 million. He'd never imagined such a thing, and he wanted to be able to tell his boys he'd seen one with his own eyes. The executive lit up and told him the whole story behind it. Only at the very end did the man ask, by the way, what Chalif had actually come for. Chalif told him, and the executive sent not 1 boy to Europe but 5. Plus, Chalif himself, for 7 weeks, with $1,000 of credit and a personal tour of Paris. He'd asked for one thing and received 10, because he walked through a door the other man was already standing at. A New York baker named Duvernoy spent 4 years trying to sell bread to a single hotel, calling on the manager week after week, getting nowhere. Then he found out the man's real passion, a national society of hotel greeters that he loved and led. Duvernoy went back and asked about that, and only that. He said nothing whatever about bread. A few days later, the hotel called him in to place an order. The third move gathers up the first two. Make the other person feel important and mean it. Carnegie was once stuck in a dragging line at a post office, and he noticed the clerk looked bored stiff, the same envelopes, stamps, and change year after year. So he set himself a small challenge: find one honest thing to admire about this man and say it. It wasn't hard. As the clerk weighed his letter, Carnegie said, "I wish I had your head of hair." The man looked up, startled, and beamed. They had a warm little exchange, and the clerk walked a few inches taller the rest of that day. When Carnegie told that story once, a man in the audience demanded to know what he'd been angling to get out of the clerk. The answer is nothing, and that's the entire point. He got the one thing he wanted, the feeling of having brightened a stranger's day for free, which stays with you long after the moment is gone. This is the oldest rule we have. Strip away thousands of years of philosophy and religion, and you keep landing on the same single instruction. Zoroaster taught it in Persia. Confucius taught it in China. Buddha taught it by the Ganges. Jesus put it most simply of all: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Almost everyone you meet believes somewhere that they are important. And Emerson admitted that every man he met was his superior in some way, because there was always something he could learn from him. Treat people as though they matter, and you become someone they never want to stop talking to. A blacksmith's son named Hall Caine, with barely 8 years of schooling, so admired the poet Rossetti that he wrote a whole lecture praising him and mailed it off. The flattered Rossetti invited the young man to be his secretary, and that one sincere letter put Caine among the great writers of his day and set him on the road to a literary fortune. And it lives in the smallest words. "I'm sorry to trouble you. Would you be so kind? Thank you." Tiny courtesies that cost nothing and quietly oil the whole grinding machinery of an ordinary day. So look back at the whole of part 2. Be interested, smile, remember the name, listen, talk about their world, make them feel important. 6 ways to make people like you, and underneath them, only one. Take yourself out of the spotlight and put the other person in it. That's the art of being heard, and there's a quiet twist folded inside it. The surest way to become someone people want to listen to is to first make them feel completely, genuinely heard. Stop performing. Pay attention. The warmth comes back to you, reliably, almost mechanically, every single time. But being liked is not the same as being agreed with. Sooner or later, the person across from you won't just need to feel heard. They'll be flatly, frustratingly wrong, and you'll need to change their mind. That's where this book turns next, and where it gets genuinely hard. Carnegie opens that chapter with a night he won an argument completely, crushed the other man with the facts, proved his case beyond any doubt, and it cost him dearly. Next time, why you can't win an argument.